For just $67, you can make as many videos as you want, and you never need to pick up a camera.
I've been working on ivermectin. Actually, it's not something I've been hired to do. It's something that sort of fell into my lap after Christmas. And after looking at the evidence and trying to communicate it, I haven't really been able to let it go and get on with my other work. So I'm hoping to pass on the baton somehow and get the message across.
So you're actually not getting paid for this then, despite your high level of expertise?
No. Fortunately, I have some other work on the go, and other people are assisting with that work while I'm doing this work.
So what triggered your interest in ivermectin initially, and when did that happen?
Well, I saw Professor Pierre Corey's appeal to the state Senate asking that ivermectin be approved for use throughout America. And it had millions of views. I think it was like 7 million views or something when I saw it. So that made me curious. But also what made me curious was just, having a doctor having to appeal to politicians for a life-saving treatment, especially something that's usually used for scabies, So it's like, so I thought, gosh, and also because of the timing, it was between Christmas and New Year. And I knew that most of these organizations take holidays at that time. So I thought, well, if anybody is, it's possible that nobody's actually working on this. And I thought, well, this is my expertise.
Yeah.
I can just use this time and I can just look at the evidence and do my thing, evaluate the studies, pool the data and so on. And then if there is anything there, well, I can just pass it on to the people, the authorities.
No, it sounds great. I think there's two things to say at this stage, Tess. One is never take a medicine that the internet you learn from YouTube or the internet. Always go to your own doctor. This is not about prescribing. So whatever you do, if you want to take a drug, don't take it from me. Don't take it from Tess on this video. Go to your own doctor. But the other thing is the importance of the evidence base. Now, this doctor was saying he thought it was a life-saving treatment. Well, personally, I'm going to need convinced.
Yes. Well, I also, it was a very dramatic thing, and the appeal to the Senate. But then I got the review that the appeal was based on, and and I also learned that there was this group called the Frontline COVID Critical Care Alliance in America. So it was the first I'd heard of that. And I looked at, I went through the review very critically, and I was really impressed because it had, because I also hadn't, I didn't know anything about ivermectin for COVID at that point. So I was amazed that there was this huge body of evidence that I'd never even heard of. There was a lot on the mechanisms of action. There were country case studies. And then there was also these observational controlled studies and randomized controlled trials. So there were about 26, 27 of these trials that had been conducted. So I can't. I'm losing
you kind of put that together. That's right. So start us off with the mechanism. We're talking about antiviral drugs here. Now, by way of background, in about 40 years, I think the only antiviral drug I've ever given is for herpes simplex, just one type of virus. The one that you use for cold sores. It's I've forgotten the name of it now. What do you call it? Acyclovir. Yeah. So basically, when you have a bacterial infection, that's fine. You get an antibiotic. We've got broad spectrum antibiotics. We've got narrow spectrum antibiotics. But when it comes to viral infections, we're a bit stuck. 21st century medicine hasn't really got there. So really, it would be good to have an antiviral medication that was safe, efficacious, cheap, and all that kind of stuff. Is there a mechanism, what we call a pharmacodynamic mechanism, whereby ivermectin could plausibly have an antiviral modality of action?
Yes. So there's been several studies done on this now, and it's quite clear that ivermectin has several mechanisms of action that are antiviral, and it also has anti-inflammatory properties. So I'm not an expert in this, but from what I understand, it blocks the viral proteins from entering the nucleus. and prevents the virus from impairing the immune system. But it also has a mechanism of action that impairs the virus's ability to replicate. So it prevents replication. It prevents the proteins from causing damage. But in terms of the anti-inflammatory effects, there are several clinical studies. So there's laboratory studies, which I'm not too clued up on, but the clinical studies show, and these are from randomized controlled trials where they've done the trial and they've also measured inflammatory markers in the blood. And they show that it affects a number of inflammatory markers and reduces them. So
interesting. So I mean, that if it is antiviral, then that could be reducing the viral load. Therefore, there's not as much viral stimulus to generate the inflammation. Thereby, you reduce inflammatory markers.
Yes.
Or it could be a direct anti-inflammatory as steroids. So it could potentially be both of those mechanisms, I would assume.
But in actual fact, in our review, the reviews that I've been involved in on ivermectin, we haven't looked at laboratory markers. We haven't looked at viral clearance.
Right.
Dr. Andrew Hill looked at viral clearance, and there were a number of studies that have measured viral clearance. And there, it's quite clear that ivermectin reduces viral load compared with placebo or not.
So clearly, at the moment, we have the SARS coronavirus 2 COVID-19 pandemic, but we have a massive range of other viral infections we'd like to treat. I mean, is it feasible that ivermectin is active against other forms of viral infection as well as SARS coronavirus 2?
There are a number of studies that show that it's active against Zika, dengue, yellow fever, and a number of other viruses. It seems very broad spectrum antiviral, and I think the exciting point that we're at now is having now discovered its usefulness against COVID. We can be exploring, and there must be many studies that can be done going forward to look at whether it will work against these other viruses that have been, plaguing people for so long.
Just my virology is appalling. Are these DNA as well as RNA viruses that we're talking about that could potentially work against? Yeah. Interesting. So there's a plausible mechanism of action. So the next thing we'd want to know is what is the evidence in practice? That, if we confine the discussion to the COVID-19 at the moment, what is the empirical evidence from clinical practice that there is an efficacy here? And is that efficacy against prevention? Is it making less severe disease? Is it preventing death?
Well, the most important outcomes for COVID, the most important outcome for treating COVID is death.
Yes.
I think everyone agrees, healthcare professionals as well as patients and public, we want to prevent death from COVID, and we want to prevent deterioration, and we want people to not get as sick, severely sick. And then for prevention, if we were to look at a medicine for prevention, we wanted to reduce COVID-19 infection. So those are the two main outcomes. If you're looking at treatment, it's death, and if you're looking at prevention, it's COVID infection. So in my initial, in the report that I submitted to the government on the 4th of January, I included randomized controlled trials and the better quality observational controlled trials, and those showed a reduction in deaths of about 83% on average.
Wow. So you took all this data, you took the numbers from these individual studies.
Yes.
I assume you put them into a new spreadsheet.
Yes, so what I did was, and this is standard practice, is you appraise each study for risk of bias according to a standard tool. So the tool that I use is the Cochrane tool, and I also,
which is a standard medical database.
And I also use the standard software, which is called Review Manager, which is also a Cochrane product. So. And you don't need to be, it's very it's very easy to use, well,
maybe for you, yeah.
So, well, I'll hopefully I can demonstrate it here if my screen share works. but so in the first instance, I pooled randomized controlled trials and observational studies, and there was this dramatic effect. And Andrew Hill was doing the same thing, unbeknownst to me at the time. He was doing the same thing, and he came up with an effect estimate of 75%. So, we were kind of in agreement that this effect is really dramatic. And there was, but there was some after I submitted that, I didn't get any feedback.
This is the UK government you've submitted this to?
Yes, I submitted it to Matt Hancock's office on the 4th of January, and also to my MPs and so on. And then I didn't get a response. I don't know if you know the story, but a few days later, because I was really worried, in the beginning I was really excited, and then as the days went by and I thought people are dying unnecessarily and I've got this information and I can't seem to communicate it, I thought, well, let me do something rather out of character and put a 3-minute, just a video to the Prime Minister saying, this is the evidence, please contact me as soon as possible. But I didn't get a response. But I got a response from the healthcare professionals and so on, saying, could we please look at this evidence? And so I put together something called, it was actually, I guess it was like the meeting that we held last week, but it was like a preliminary one to share the evidence. And the outcome of that meeting was that, please can you work further on this? And what can you do to get the work published? Because at that stage, I just put the report on my website. And although I had reached out to journals, but they were I reached out to the BMJ, they wanted a formal submission, and that would take weeks, weeks to be assessed and all that. So I just felt like there wasn't the time. It felt like there is an urgency to it.
I mean, you are going through that longer process as we speak,
yes,
aren't you? It's just that it takes a lot of time.
Yes, it was just at the time. In actual fact, the World Health Organization in the 2015 pandemic the Ebola health emergency, they released a statement then to say that researchers had a moral duty to communicate important research information as soon as possible. Yeah. And that was when they also introduced the preprint websites, so that you didn't.
Is that when that started? I didn't know that.
So you didn't have to go through the journal submission while you were waiting. You could post your work, so it could be evaluated. And so so there is a moral obligation, both I felt as a clinician as well, and as a medical doctor as well as a researcher, to communicate the message. But so what I decided after that point was, because there is this kind of mad obsession in a way with randomized controlled trials, I thought, well, we will just look at the randomized controlled trials, and I will put together a team of very experienced systematic reviewers, and we will start from scratch. So we started from scratch, evaluating each study again. In this instance, I left it up to 2 others. So we always do it to 2 reviewers independently. And so we redid all the data extraction. We redid the study quality assessment. And then you reanalyze the data, you put it all together. So we put it all together, and into what's called a forest plot, which I'll show you in a minute. And in that instance, we got a 68% average reduction.
Protection against death.
So we're looking at deaths, So, and there was a range. And I'm just off the top of my head, something like 27% to 80-something%.
So I think it's important to emphasize, this is not you going on a hobby horse or a flight of fantasy. You've put together a team of peers, people with extreme levels of expertise.
Yes, well, between us, I mean, Cochrane Review is a database of evidence.
Yes.
Of synthesized evidence. So it has all these reviews, which are substantial documents. They're sort of anything from 50 to 300, 400 pages, where each study is evaluated and the characteristics of each study is recorded and so on, and the risk of bias. And so we've used that method to conduct the latest review, and which only includes randomized controlled trials. So, and because of the intense interest in ivermectin, we tended towards very strict criteria. In my earlier report, I would say I gave trialists the benefit of the doubt. I emailed them where I needed clarification, but I tended to give them the benefit of the doubt. And I would say that is more like, I would call it a pandemic license. And I feel quite justified in using a pandemic license in a pandemic, because in a pandemic, you really need to think outside the box.
Yeah.
But anyway, we've been forced to think inside the box.
Yeah.
And so we've provided the inside the box evidence. And I'll show you that now. I'll show you. Let me show you.
Yep.
Can you see that screen?
I can, yeah.
Okay. So this is RevMan software, okay, Review Manager. This diagram is called the forest plot. Okay.
Yep.
And this is the forest plot for death, the outcome death. Down the side here, you see the names of all the studies.
Yes, and you've actually contacted quite a few of these authors personally.
Yes, yeah. And so we've received additional clarification, additional data where on occasion there was a study that hadn't reported deaths, and we'd email them and say, did you have any deaths? For example, I mean that's a sort of extreme example, but because that would usually be something that would be reported, So these studies here are the randomized controlled trials, abbreviated RCT. These are observational controlled trials. Now, we wanted to just present what's considered the gold standard. So in our latest review, we've only included the randomized controlled trials.
Got it.
For this illustration, I've got the observational controlled trials as well, because these are good studies.
That's what gave you the 83% efficacy against death. Yeah.
But in the original report, because several studies have been published since my original report in January, it's a rapidly evolving field. There are about 40 ongoing studies as well, trials. So since my original report, several of these are new published studies. So I think in the original one, I only had 5 or 6 or 7 RCTs.
Right.
So we've got the studies there. Then this column here, this is ivermectin versus control. And the events they talk about are the number of deaths out of a total number.
Yes.
So, for example, let's choose a random one. Mohan. Okay, Mohan had no deaths out of 100 people in the ivermectin arm and no deaths out of 52 people in the other arm. So this, what you don't see here is the severity of illness. But I can tell you that Mohan was conducted in mild COVID or mild to moderate. So in that sort of study, you wouldn't really expect there to be deaths in that number. And then if you look at a different study like NAE, this is an Iranian study, there were 4 out of 120 deaths in ivermectin and 11 out of 60, a sample the size of 60 in the other. So this study included patients in hospital with any severity of illness. So there would have been mild to moderate and severe patients in this study. So that creates a kind of inconsistency, and we've done in our latest review, we've separated the studies into mild to moderate disease and severe disease. So you can see the difference in the effect estimate. But for the purposes that we're looking at now, they're all together. And so you can see in the ivermectin arm, there were 27 deaths out of 1,000.
Yeah.
That's round number they add up to there.
Yeah.
And then in the control arm, there's 82 out of 903.
903. Yeah. Wow.
Now, this is the what we call the effect estimate, the average effect estimate here.
Yep.
The 0.35 means that there's a 65%. So it's 1 minus 0.35.
Yes.
So this represents a reduction. So this means that there's a 65% average reduction in deaths with ivermectin compared with control.
I actually understand that, Tess. Yeah, I've got that.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
And just sort of eyeballing this diagram over here.
Yeah.
You can see that, so this diamond shape here is the summary. It represents the summary estimate. Okay, the bit in the middle is the 95, and the points at the end are the range there.
Yes.
And what you can see, and if it's on the left,
yes,
it means that it favors ivermectin.
Yes.
If it touches the line, it means you can't. It could favor or not favor.
Yeah.
And if it's on the other side, it doesn't favor ivermectin. It favors control. So you can see, if we were to take one study, this one or this one, we would say, oh, well, ivermectin doesn't really work because look, if we were to take this one, we would say, oh, ivermectin's fantastic. Look. So, which is why you need evidence synthesis. So whilst randomized controlled trials are the gold standard of individual trials, evidence synthesis and systematic reviews with meta-analysis are the gold standard of evidence, and it's this sort of evidence that is used to underpin clinical practice guidelines.
So this is actually an even more powerful tool than the randomized controlled trial, because it's combining several,
Yes. So I wanted to show you something now, because a study was published on Thursday or Friday. So I wanted to show you, it's this one here, Lopez Medina. Yep. So Lopez Medina is a study conducted in Colombia, and they only had, it was 400 people, and it was in mild disease. So one wouldn't really expect a lot of deaths in mild disease. But there was one death. So we can plug that in, and you can see, other studies. So this was mild disease, no deaths. Another one here, Resi was mild disease. There was one death in the ivermectin arm and naught in the control arm. It's pretty random when you're dealing with mild disease, Of course, there's the odd person who might be unlucky and have a very poor outcome, such as death. So Lopez Medina, we can plug in the data. So there were no deaths there, and there were 200 people in the ivermectin arm, and then there was one death in the control arm out of 198. So we put that in, and you can see, if we look at that, it says, oh, well, ivermectin can't possibly work because, but if we look at the overall effect estimate, it's still saying 65%, and the confidence interval has narrowed a little bit, so that we can be a little bit more certain of the effect.
So that's the p-value there, essentially, is it?
The p-value is here. So test for overall is p equals 0.02.
Oh, that's immensely significant. That's huge. That's two out of 1,000, isn't it? That's amazing.
And the other thing that's really interesting, now that I'm just looking at this analysis,
that's incredible. 0.002.
I actually haven't done this yet, so this is the first time I've entered those data. But I can see. So we've got the RCTs there, the randomized trials there, and we've got the observational trials here. And if you look at this here, this is the test for subgroup differences. So the one subgroup is the RCT. The subgroup is the OCT. And we've got an I squared of 0%. and the P is not significant. So what it's telling us is that the findings of the randomized trials and the findings of the observational control trials are the same. They are consistent.
Right. Okay. Got you. So that's testing the top group against the bottom group.
Yes. Yeah. That tests the top group against the bottom. The others. So, for example, here, this test. This is an overall test for how consistent the findings are, and there is inconsistency here, and mainly, in my opinion, that inconsistency is down to the different characteristics of the studies.
Yes.
So because sometimes they use different doses, sometimes they give ivermectin along with another treatment. Yes. Sometimes the control group is given an active treatment as well. So it might be a few of the studies were ivermectin versus hydroxychloroquine.
And we are satisfied that hydroxychloroquine is useless now in COVID-19, are we?
No, I don't think so. I think that's another area that needs proper review.
Okay.
So I didn't really follow the hydroxychloroquine story at the time, but I am interested to look into it now.
Okay.
Honestly, I've just been for the past year. I've just had my head down doing my usual work, and then and kind of just leaving COVID to others to deal with.
But this on top, you've done a very thorough job on the ivermectin.
Well, it's been a lot of fun, and I'm so excited to share. I just can't wait.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. So, is ivermectin going to be effective at different stages, prophylactic, early? I mean, basically, I'm very simple. I think of this disease in two stages. There's the viral stage, basically, when the pathology is caused by the effect of the virus, and then the second stage is the inflammatory stage, the body's inflammatory reaction. So the reason the alveoli fill up with fluid is the inflammatory effect. So. What would be the best time? Does your data show you the best time to intervene for ivermectin, and would you expect efficacy as prophylaxis, early treatment, and later treatment?
I think what is apparent because also what you have to realize, ivermectin is in use for COVID in many countries around the world now, and in many facility settings and so on. The most amazing thing, or useful thing about ivermectin is that it is very simple in that it works at all stages of the disease. So there are studies where it's been given as prophylaxis, and
with evidence of efficacy as a prophylaxis
for health workers and contact. And when you look at compared with controls, also looking at massive reductions, like 88% in my initial analysis, 88% reduction in infection rates. So you just need to treat 4 people in our analysis. You treat 4 people, you give 4 people ivermectin, so 4 care workers, and you prevent 1 infection rate based on our original.
And that's called numbers needed to treat, and that is a very effective. That's a very impressive ratio, isn't it?
So just to answer your question, in terms of its usefulness is that it can be used for prevention, and it can be used for mild disease and moderate disease because it reduces viral load. It leads to a quicker improvement. Prevents deterioration, and it's also useful in severe disease. Although the earlier it's used, the better.
Yes,
it's useful.
I mean, for more severe disease, for later disease, we have other anti-inflammatories, don't we? We have dexamethasone and tocilizumab.
No, but it certainly is included and recommended by experts like the FLCCC and many others around the world for severe disease as well.
Even later, okay. Right.
Even in later, and I think that's probably because it has anti-inflammatory properties too.
I see. Yeah. So if it's antiviral, you're reducing the viral load, you're reducing the amount of inflammation caused by the virus. You would expect less inflammatory sequelae after the viral stage of the illness. That all kind of makes sense.
And another thing that I've been thinking about a lot this past week is that we don't really have any treatment options for long COVID. Now, none of the studies that we included has looked at long COVID, but there are some interesting studies and data coming out of Argentina. I think it's Argentina, possibly Peru as well, where they've been giving ivermectin to long COVID patients with really promising results. So, I think if there is any research to be done, especially since, long COVID there's just no treatment options, and so many people are suffering from long COVID now. It would be very interesting to do a trial looking at randomizing people to ivermectin for long COVID or not. And it needn't be the reason why I say I wouldn't mind a trial in this, but I would mind a placebo-controlled trial on ivermectin for treatment, because we know that it works for treatment, and I wouldn't feel that that's ethical. But for long COVID, I think it would be interesting, because one could just do do it for 2 weeks, and then the patient would still have the option of then going on to ivermectin thereafter. So
that's right.
Would be prepared to do that sort of a trial.
It's a very important point there, because if you know a treatment is efficacious and you are deliberately withholding treatment from a whole group of patients to put them in the control arm to give them a placebo, that is, we can only really recruit people onto trials and put them into the treatment group or the placebo group if we genuinely don't know.
Yes, and I think this is a very important point, because there are new trials starting up, and I think any new trial starting up should have on the consent form that the existing evidence shows that ivermectin may reduce your risk of death substantially. And I think there would be very few people willing to take part in such a trial.
No, it's a good point. And reducing death, what about reducing severity of symptoms? Have we got any data there?
Yeah, there are data on that. And again, in our review, we've graded it as low certainty, which I think it's a bit harsh. It's a bit of a harsh grading, given that there's several studies that report it's a big reduction. It's 40% reduced chance of deteriorating.
What you're telling me here, Tess, is you are being very conservative in the claims you're making based on the evidence that you have.
Yes, very conservative.
Now, one thing that I'm always very keen on is sort of a risk-benefit analysis. So, what do we know about the risks of taking ivermectin? Is this a drug where there's a long prescribing history? Have billions of doses been given out, or is this a fairly new trial drug in terms of drug safety, regardless of what it's being used to treat?
John, you ask all the right questions, actually. So ivermectin's been around for 40 years. And so there's a huge body of evidence on its safety. It's actually on the World Health Organization's essential medicines. Essential
medicines, yes.
For scabies and worms and
other parasites.
Yes. Because because it's been given to billions of people, there's
literally billions, isn't
billions,
it?
Yes.
Literally billions.
Yes.
Thousands of millions.
Yeah. I took a close look at the Vigi Access database, which is a pharmacovigilance database set up by Uppsala University and the World Health Organization. Because I thought, well, something that's been around for so long, it would be interesting to have a look. Like if you look up paracetamol, something in the database. So there's this drug that's been around for so long, been given to so many people, and registered on the pharmacovigilance database. There's something like 4,600 adverse events and 16 deaths. So, I thought, well,
but this is out of a third of the world's population
yes, I
being
thought,
given
well,
it.
16 deaths,
Well, it's probably a lot less than ibuprofen.
Oh yes, definitely.
Yeah.
But if you compare it, so this is something been around for a very long time. If you compare it to something like remdesivir, which has just been around for the last year, you're looking at more adverse events and 417 deaths. So it sort of puts things in perspective. You can't compare because obviously they're different medicines, but I think it does give you an idea of how safe this medicine is.
Yeah, I mean, people are always asking me, is this treatment safe? Well, the answer is, of course, it's not safe. It can potentially work. Anything that can potentially work is not 100% guaranteed safe. There can be side effects. But if a third of the world's population's had it and there's been 16 deaths and 4,600 adverse events, that's probably one of the safest medications.
It is one of the safest. I mean, if you looked up aspirin, ibuprofen, it would be in the thousands more. Tens of thousands more.
Yeah. So I really like that safety profile. Sounds good. So mostly it's been used for parasitic infections and things like that in the past.
Something else on the safety profile. So. Because Merck originally had the patent for ivermectin, and ivermectin is completely generic now, so anyone can make it. But they did a series of safety tests in the 90s and so on, and in 2002 they published a report, a randomized controlled trial, where they randomized people to different doses, and they reported that it was safe in up to 10 times the dose that's used for scabies and the same as used for COVID.
So I'm guessing I'm slightly heavier than I'd like to be. So the dose for me would be, I'm guessing, about 16 milligrams a day, something like that.
So it comes in a 3 milligram, 6 milligram, 12 milligram tablet.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So for a 60, and it's given according to weight. So for a 60 kilogram person, or round about that, give or take 10K, you're probably looking, you would be looking to take a 12 milligram for, although, so they're different dosing regimes, and it would depend on what I'm not giving anyone dose advice, I'm just saying what.
Understand that, yeah.
Depending on where you are and the severity of your disease, it has a very wide therapeutic range. So doctors in Brazil are using 0.4 milligrams per kilo, which means that they would be.
Oh, that's high. That's high.
Well, it's within the therapeutic range. So it's 0.2 to 0.4 milligrams per kilo are the general recommended. The doctors and the clinical protocols that are using ivermectin, they use one of those two. So it could be 12 milligrams or 24 milligrams for a 60 kilogram person. I think it would depend on your severity of illness, really. But the investigations have shown that many times that dose exactly. So they've done 10 times. They went up to 120 milligrams in the Merck study.
And we call this a therapeutic index, don't we? So it's got a good therapeutic index.
It has a very broad therapeutic index, and some of the studies, like in India, they're giving a 12 milligram tablet for 3 days if you've got COVID, and they're giving obviously even in different parts of India they're using different protocols, but and for prophylaxis they're giving. Just say, so someone exposed to COVID might take one tablet 1 day and one tablet 2 days later, sort of thing. And for health workers who are taking it for prophylaxis, or other frontline workers, they might take it once a month.
Really?
Yeah, once a month to 4 to 6 weeks. So does
it stick around? It's got quite a long half-life, hasn't it?
No, its half-life is apparently 3 days, but that's the regimen that's being used by many.
And it seems to work.
And it seems to work because it seems amazing that even at what seems to be a fairly low innocuous kind of dose and infrequent, it's protecting people.
And this is just given as a simple tablet. It's just a normal medication.
Yes,
you would
tablet.
take it once a day.
Always a tablet. Now, I think, in actual fact, the FDA in America has expressed some concerns in a recent statement saying that people have been hospitalized from using ivermectin, and they're recommending against it, which seems a bit of a drastic measure, given that we know it's so safe. And I wondered, because it's available in a veterinary,
yes, it is.
So it's available as an injection for worms and animals in this country. Actually, it is available in that form. And I wondered if maybe in America people are using the injection or something, because certainly an oral ivermectin shouldn't be leading to people being hospitalized.
Yeah, it's just horrific. The idea that anyone would take any drug without being told by their own doctor, and certainly injecting something is terrifying. It's not surprising they get complications. Because when you actually read, I went on to NICE before I did this talk, the British National Formulary Guideline. There's a horrendous long list of side effects. But these major effects have only got 4,600 reports globally. So although these side effects have occurred, it sounds like they're pretty rare, and the overall toxicity of the drug is low.
Yes, I mean, if you compare it to, other, especially all the new experimental treatments that are being used now, it has a much better safety profile. Even tocilizumab, tocilizumab's got many more adverse events.
Our monoclonal antibodies can be a bit, and yet we use those. So is ivermectin really expensive, Tess?
No, it's very, very cheap. It's something like $168 a kilogram. Okay, we're talking about milligrams. Right. So anyone wanting to manufacture it would buy the product for that, and then could make thousands and thousands of doses. Wow. In 2018, they evaluated, a proposal was put forward to WHO to approve ivermectin for use in scabies officially, and have it on the essential medicines list officially. And in that document, it says that you get 112 milligram tablets for $2.90. So that's virtually 100 treatments, or 50 treatments, shall we say?
So we're talking about 2 or 3 English pennies, literally.
Yes, yeah. But I mean, if we were to get it manufactured here, it would be great because there aren't any. There's no one in the UK making it, and I'm sure there must be some company out there who would be interested in making it. And then, it probably wouldn't be 2 pennies, but a bit more. But I'm sure even if it was, 50p or £1, it would still be significantly cost-effective.
So basically, it's a simple molecule. Any drug manufacturer could produce it at bulk at relatively short notice, and cost and supply wouldn't really be a problem. It's a stable drug; you can ship it around the world. Yeah.
There are many suppliers around the world, so one could also just import it very cheaply, I should think.
Yeah. So what is the next step here, Tess? I mean, I'm convinced of efficacy and I'm convinced of safety here, and yet it's not on our national guidelines. Being used apparently with good efficacy in India, South America, but what do we do? How do we take this forward?
Well, we had a meeting called the British Ivermectin Recommendation Development Meeting, and at the meeting there were it was a really interesting panel. We had 11 professors from around the world who have experience with ivermectin, and we also had GPs from the UK who knew nothing about ivermectin but are dealing with COVID patients on a daily basis. And we also had some public representatives, a couple of people with COVID, long COVID, and so on. And the outcome of the meeting after we presented the evidence was that ivermectin should be used for prevention and treatment in this country. So we've written that up in a document, and we've shared it with we've shared it with Matt Hancock's office and many MPs. And we've also shared it with the World Health Organization's COVID team. We've also shared it with the Americas, the US's National Institute for Health, and also the Food and Drug Administration, and we've shared it with the Canadian regulatory bodies as well.
Wow. So you've told everyone who is anyone around the world about this. You're not keeping it quiet, are you?
Because at the moment it seems to be these bodies that are sort of gatekeepers to our health at the moment.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we're dependent on them.
If we can get
no doctor in the UK.
Prove it.
Yeah, no doctor in the UK would dare prescribe this off license, I don't think. Unless it's I suppose some consultants might.
Yes, I think some doctors are considering doing so.
Right.
Because the thing with being a doctor is that there's a Helsinki Declaration, which means that if you believe or know something to be effective, then you are actually morally obliged to give it. I think the issue is that in this country, many doctors actually do not know about ivermectin, and they're not familiar with it and with its safety and so on. And they work so hard, they are not aware, they can't familiarize themselves with the evidence, and so they are very dependent on guidance from the government, scientists, and so on.
So you've condensed that into a guidance. It's just a matter of government bodies taking it up.
Government and scientists looking at this, because what we get because so many people have written to us and said, what can we do? And so, I usually say, well, speak to your MP, speak to the GP, give them the document, and let them look at the evidence. And we still get emails back saying, they say the evidence is insufficient, or there's a sort of reflex reaction that there's insufficient evidence and they're waiting for more evidence. And
I marked student essays for a long time, and we actually had to introduce a rule that said you are not allowed to put "however we are awaiting more evidence to adjudicate the efficacy of this treatment." It's always true we need more evidence. It's there's not a lot of point saying it really. Of course, you'd like a massive randomised double-blind controlled trial, but in the real world, it's very difficult to do that.
And if you look at it, actually, I feel like taking you back to that other. So if you look at this, so just say one decided to do. Let me just go to there we go. So just say, we were going to do a big double-blind randomized controlled trial and look at and include 3,000 people. So we've got about 3,000 there, let's just say. There would be an interim analysis. So you wouldn't recruit 3,000 and have all these deaths. So we've got about 100 and what have we got there? About 170 deaths or so. So you wouldn't recruit all of these patients without having an interim analysis. So you do an interim analysis, and you'd want to check that there weren't significant differences in the deaths, and you'd probably get to about so this because it's double, you might get to about 1,000 patients, and then just say, hang on. We're getting double the number of deaths in the control arm, so we have to stop this trial.
It would be unethical to continue the trial, condemning people in the placebo group.
You might never get to this figure. I'm going to show you another one, actually, because this did actually occur in one of these. There we go. This is a meta-analysis of prevention, of studies for prevention. So this figure here, so this is ivermectin versus control. There were 25. So people in these studies they didn't have COVID. They were given COVID to protect them. They were given ivermectin to protect them from getting
from COVID.
So they were healthcare workers, or they were family members who there was a COVID contact, and so they were given ivermectin to prevent them from getting COVID. So 25 out of 1,397 who received ivermectin got COVID infection.
Right.
And in the control group, 386 out of 883 got COVID infection.
So that's the result of this meta-analysis of 6 studies
so
here.
that's the result of this meta-analysis, okay?
Yeah.
So the overall risk reduction or estimate of effect is 93% there, okay? So there's 93% reduction in infection rates if you get ivermectin versus control. Now that's without grading the evidence. So we might say this is low certainty evidence, because we might say, well, these studies they have some design limitations.
Yeah.
And so you could call it moderate certainty and say probably, because it's such a big effect. I just want to go here and show you there is some inconsistency. Do you see this here?
This is checking for the consistency between the individual
studies.
There's some
inconsistency across these studies.
Yeah.
And if you have a look, it probably comes from this study here. It's a big study.
Oh, I see. That's the most inconsistent of the bunch.
It had no infection in the ivermectin arm out of 788.
Yeah.
237 in the control. And you think, well, that sounds a bit
too good to be true.
To have none, you know. But I've been in contact with the author, and he's Hector Carvalho. He's done so much work on ivermectin, and it is absolutely true according to his work and findings. So, but we could say, well, let's get rid of that study because we are a bit worried about those findings. So it comes out of the analysis, and we can then have a look and see. We end up with it's still a very narrow. It's a very narrow.
92% efficacy. Or something.
So.
Wow.
So, that's 87. So it's still a huge effect, and there's very little one can do to it to make the effect go away. If you, because in this instance, all the studies are on this side of the line. They all favor ivermectin.
Yep, they all favor it. Yeah.
But if you say, well, we're still a bit worried about these studies because they were conducted in Egypt, or whatever reason they give, because they weren't big funded RCTs, we could downgrade the evidence, but it certainly can't be downgraded lower than low. I just want to point out this study here, Schumann. Professor Schumann conducted the study in Egypt, and we actually graded this. When I said that we were very strict in our grade and assessing the evidence, the quality, this is one of the studies that was too harshly assessed, but we assessed it as being at moderate to high risk of bias. And partly because they closed the study early. Now, this is something that's not desirable when you're doing RCTs, to close a study early. But the reason they closed the study early was because ethically, they felt it was not ethical to continue giving the
placebo,
to continue giving placebo, not giving ivermectin, because the effect was so dramatic. So if you're going to call for more studies based on this kind of thing, you actually
are condemning a lot of people to death.
Yeah. So one needs to really look into these studies and not just you do this by rote assessment where you're checking boxes and say, this is not good enough, and we'll or there was no funding, or in fact some of these studies, because they're all done by clinicians, they're done by doctors, not by pharmaceutical companies,
Yes.
And some of the doctors actually paid for the PCR tests themselves,
because this is clinician-led research rather than a multi-study, commercially organised, large-scale
And I think, it's quite amazing. And I think we should be very grateful to these doctors from other countries who've done this work. Because in this country, there's virtually no simple clinician-led studies like this. And there's certainly nothing done on generic medicines, which are why they're so out of fashion is very sad.
Actually, I was talking to a senior medical colleague who we're hoping to report on soon on this channel, actually. And he's doing a study on his own, and it's remarkably difficult without official funding.
Yeah, it is.
It's basically you're pulling favours in from all over the place. Basically.
Well, that's what I'm doing at the moment. I mean, I just yesterday I downloaded the protocol just to get the protocol template from the NHS, research ethics body. Now it's a 71-page template.
Yep.
So 71 pages. Just because I thought, let me fill in a protocol for design a study for long COVID. I thought we can just do this little study quickly and have this answer in a couple of months. But no, 71-page ethics approval protocol. And then it would probably take them about 3 months to assess the protocol. I don't know.
Probably more than that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then one can commence, and then there's this insistence on where your funding's coming from. If you say, I mean, people have been amazed. Even not doing this work without funding. People have been saying, "Oh, really? You're not being funded?" They're almost suspicious of that.
Well, the other thing that really excites me is, like me, you'll have seen people dying of viral infections. The idea that we could use this to treat other viral infections is really quite exciting. Exciting's not a strong enough word.
I know my head just spins with the possibilities. If you think of Epstein-Barr, the people who suffer from chronic fatigue and even other things like Lyme disease and hepatitis. We don't have treatments for any of these things. So now we have an antiviral that, has, I think we've got to start doing all these studies and evaluating.
And the cancers that can come from these sometimes long-term viral infections as well.
That's true, yes.
Yeah. Tess, I think there's probably more people than average are still with us at the moment, because I was just captivated all the way through that. That's incredible. What was that software called again?
Oh, it's Review Manager.
Very impressive. Yeah.
I think it's still free, but you might have to. I'm not sure if it's still free, but
very impressive. So basically, it's a meta-analysis software just waiting for you to do the.
Anyone could do their own meta-analysis.
Anyone could do their own meta-analysis.
You download the software and it's pretty simple.
I remember about 20 years ago, I was doing a health studies masters, and one of the assignments was to do a meta-analysis. And you actually had to take data and re-crunch it. And let's say I didn't do too well on that assignment. So, but that software would have revolutionised it. It would have been
absolutely. I mean,
would have been spectacular.
The Cochrane organisation relies a lot on volunteers as well. Because historically the Cochrane reviews have not been funded. They're done by volunteer teams of professionals and. Usually there's sort of clinicians and researchers all there.
I've got colleagues that have written them. Yeah.
Yes. So it has to be very user friendly, and so anybody reading a study could take out the data and be like the deaths versus the.
It's very unusual that someone put a piece of software like that, and I understood it within a few minutes. That was quite a new experience for me. Tess, that is just fantastic. We're going to communicate this. I know a lot of people will be sharing this video around, and
Booker, got it. Are you kidding me? I mean, if you want to define the phrase grandma shot, that defines the phrase grandma shot.
I have never seen anything like that in a game, ever.
Can we see this again, please?
Look at this. He doesn't even touch it. He just volleyballs it up. It's almost like he's done it before. I know he's laughing because he can't believe it.
You know,
that is crazy.
What the heck?
Well, Detroit will calm you down. They'll work their plays.
Steal. He kept it in bounds. Here it is again.
Oh! Yes!
This is one for the book, UB. He's done a lot of great shots, but I've never seen this before from him.
Well, you see, it was an excellent save. Now, when he gets it back, you'll see him elevate, do a 360, and just toss it up.
Griffin on the run. He's looking. He's going. Griffin. Oh, come on! Oh, man!
Griffin just putting on a show. Doesn't even need to look. No problem. No glass, no look.
Griffin starting to run away.
Make sure you keep him to an absolute minimum. Double Scobie spins right away from it. Behind his shoulder, throws it over his shoulder, no look, and gets it. Never saw the rim. Mamba. 79-51, as good as you'll ever see. 31 for Kobe. And that will be seen a few more times tonight.
I want to see it right now. Forget the live play. I want to see the replay. that was special.
A spectacular shot. They go back to get the ball. Throw it as far as you can.
Keeps it on the rim. Keeps it on the rim. Keeps it in the
Jabbar, slight jump hook.
Durant right around Chandler. Oh, come on! Oh, wow!
Jeez. He looks like Urban, and this was more like an Iceman move right here. I don't know, somehow kisses it off the glass. A little English. The greatest scorer in the game right now, Kevin Durant. Got it going here early in Denver.
So that will maybe give Seattle a chance to work its way back in. But with Utah just...
All you can do is laugh, folks. It's that kind of show from the Utah Jazz. This is one of the highlights of the season.
Along the baseline, just stumbling. Why not? Deep check.
When you're closing out your
자네 요즘 무슨 게임 하나?
검은 사막 합니다.
합격! 사장님 광활한 세계를 탐험하는 모험가의 비밀과 디테일부터 스케일까지 항상 최고를 추구하는 인재야. 보보!
광활한 오픈월드, 최고의 그래픽과 액션, 월드 클래스 MMORPG, 신규 클래스 세이지 출시, 검은 사막. 출시 기념 이벤트도 놓치지 마세요.
자네 요즘 무슨 게임 하나?
검은 사막 합니다.
합격!
Cảm bấy lâu có chắc là thật không em, mình từng lạ lắm, vẫn sâu sẽ càng đau nếu ta xa nhau. Vạn phật sâu có đội khác, vẫn yêu một ai đó hết lòng, dù có đánh đôi cả bầu trời cũng chỉ xin nhận lại.